Coming to you from the western edge of El Loco Explosión Artica. This is In Dark Places. Merry Christmas. We had a blizzard here in West Virginia. Temperature right now is 0 and the wind chill is 20 to 30 below. So get you some hot chocolate and nestle warm by the fire and listen to our little annual Christmas tradition, UFOs of Christmas Past, Chapter 2. And we also have the Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week.
Damon, what are you doing?
He's doing what comes naturally, killing the innocent.
You cannot do this!
Step aside. 2 lives have already been lost.
No one grieves for that more than I.
Let's step aside, or this arrow will be yours.
If we falter now, those lives will have been lost in vain.
Or will not be lost. 4 lives will be spared.
And what are 4 lives compared with the thousands more that would be lost if this plague is not ended? I know there may be no room in your heart for God, Damon, but in my heart, I know he would not abandon us. In God's name.
No man has spilt more blood in God's name than I. A benevolent God will not ask such things of men!
If you kill her, you will not have God to blame.
Last week I introduced you to that deer that fell in love with the Christmas reindeer decorations and got trapped in those people's house. Remember that guy? Well, now I'd like to tell the story about the deer spotted running around Oregon neighborhood with Christmas lights by Stephanie Weaver. Thanks, Stephanie. Rudolph got a head start on decking the halls ahead of the Christmas holiday. According to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, a buck was spotted walking around Dallas, Oregon, with Christmas lights attached to his antlers. Thanks to a call from the Dallas, Oregon Police Department, ODFW staff were able to locate and dart the buck to remove the lights. To all of you Clark Griswolds out there, you know you love decorating for Christmas, but this is a step too far, ODFW said. Linda Reed, a resident in the area, also shared a video of the buck walking through her yard last week. And I'll try to remember to attach that video in the description. I'll probably forget, but I'll try to remember to do that. I'm glad he was released from his Rudolph duties, said Reed. She told Fox television stations she originally saw the animal pictured in a Facebook post before seeing the deer in her own backyard. When I saw him, I was like, oh my gosh, there's that deer that I saw the other day, she shared. I was glad he wasn't in distress at all. ODFW was able to rescue the buck and remove the lights. Officials said no injuries were found on the buck, and he quickly got up and took off. A yellow ear tag was placed in each ear for identification purposes. So the guy has a permanent record now. ODFW says bucks rub their antlers on trees, bushes, and other objects from October through mid-December to mark their territory and show dominance against other bucks. Each fall, the department says it receives reports of bucks tangled up in volleyball nets, hammocks, and even Christmas lights. The department says if you have deer frequenting your property, it's best to hang lights higher up in trees where bucks cannot get into them.
Christmas Eve night has a special wonder for many. On a clear winter's night, the stars are bright, and if you lean up against a tree or a fence post and lay your head back, it's easy to get lost in the spectacle of all those stars. In the spirit of the season, let's explore the UFO of Christmas Past. It was Christmas Eve, 1971, I was an airman first class assigned to the 1881st Communications Squadron at a huge U.S. Air Force base in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. It was about 11:30 p.m. I was walking west on the lane that would take me to the base chapel for midnight mass. The sky was crystal clear. Cam Ranh Bay was only a couple of degrees latitude north of the equator. For a kid who grew up in upstate New York, it was a bit discomforting because we were too far south to see common constellations like Ursa Major, aka the Big Dipper, in the northern sky. As I looked into the western sky, I could see the constellation Perseus, and above that, Taurus. High in the sky above them was the constellation Orion, with its left shoulder star of Betelgeuse, bright as ever. Suddenly, I saw a bright star-like object zooming from the north across the western sky just below Taurus. My first impression, that's a meteor or perhaps some fighter jet. Then the object just stopped. It hovered there below Taurus for perhaps a minute or two. Then it seemed to dance or dart around before it dashed off towards the south at tremendous speed until it just winked out. I was 19 years old. I didn't know what to think. All I could say was, wow. During midnight mass, I was not with the program at all. I was replaying what I saw over and over in my head. Fearing the Air Force peers would think I was intoxicated or worse, nuts, I kept the sighting to myself for many years until I shared it about 15 years ago to a couple of Native American folks I used to know. Now, I've shared with you a deeply personal sighting as a Christmas gift.
This report is from Berlin, New Jersey, on December 24th, 1970, around 6 p.m. It was a cylinder shape, not moving like you see in all the usual sightings. Like I could feel it observing me. I was around 7 years old. We just came back from a Christmas event for kids at the VFW, I don't know, in a nearby town. I was outside on the front lawn playing with a board game. I got at the event and had a strange feeling. Something was looking at me. I looked up, and approximately 20 to 30 feet above my head was an object that I thought was falling toward me, and I scrambled into the bushes near where I was sitting. I turned around from beneath the bushes and looked up, and there was a cylindrical object. It looked kind of like a duffel bag, painted silver, with something what looked like smoke stains near the bottom of it, and it was hovering. I ran in the house and got my mom. She came out, and when she did, it had slowly risen and was gaining altitude and proceeding across the street. When I pointed it out to her, it was at least a couple hundred feet away and slowly gaining altitude and speed, though still fairly slow. It then started to tumble as it gained altitude and proceeded over the field across the street, still gaining altitude till it was no longer visible. It traveled fairly slow and tumbled in a controlled fashion. I thought it made some kind of intermittent beeping, but with a good pause between tones. That's about all I remember. I was just a kid. My dad made fun of me later. Good job, Dad. You loser. But my mom always told me not to worry about him. Yay, Mom.
Here's a special Christmas story out of Colorado Springs from December 24th, 1970. It's called Growing Up with Aliens. The sighting that I am about to report took place many years ago when I was 16. The date was Christmas Eve, 1970. My grandparents owned a very large and remote cattle ranch, and our family had enjoyed a wonderful evening together, and all had long since retired for the evening. I was awakened out of a dead sleep for some reason. I had fallen asleep in the living room on the couch with a huge picture window directly behind me. It was a winter wonderland outside with nearly 3 feet of snow and a thin cloud bank that was draped over Pikes Peak, off in the distance and magically lighted by a full moon. Feeling totally awake, I turned around to take in the enchanting scene. Then I saw something that I couldn't believe. A tiny cloud moved away from the moon and fully lighted the valley where our ranch house was nestled. Not more than 4 football fields out from the house, I noticed a big black shadow being cast down onto our meadow. What made me take notice was that the shadow had perfectly straight lines on the snow. I then realized that this cloud, which I couldn't see due to our overhanging porch, had straight edges. Impossible, I thought. So at 2:30 in the morning and 20 below zero, I stepped outside on the porch in my long johns and gazed up. What I saw, I'll never forget. A massive black rectangle-shaped object floating just over our meadow. I ran back into the house, jumped into my coat and snow boots, and took off running across the meadow towards the craft. Within a matter of 4 minutes, I was standing directly under it and realized it was less than 300 feet above me. The craft was silent, and it had no lights or windows that I could see. It must have been 1,500 feet long and 400 to 500 feet tall and 300 feet thick. I stood under that thing for as long as I could stand the cold. It did nothing, so I finally just went back. What was very strange about this was that the entire time I was looking at it, I felt safe. Somehow I knew that they were mining for minerals. As I was growing up on the ranch, there was an area on the ranch that you could not go to. Horses would refuse to go to that area, and if I forced the issue, they would go crazy and start bucking. I never could walk into that range of small mountains. If I did, a very strange, empowering fear would sweep over me until I turned around and crossed that invisible boundary, and instantly it would go away. I learned from the horses where the boundary line was, and it never changed. For all I know, it's still in place. I had numerous encounters with beings and craft on the ranch growing up. The most beautiful craft of all that I saw twice was a golden teardrop shape, always coming or leaving this area that was around 3,000 acres. It was common knowledge on the ranch about that location. It was a family joke that we always knew where the cattle and the horses weren't. When I was a kid, I would take friends to the borderline and we would run into the area in an attempt to try to tease the aliens. I found out in short order that they weren't amused because I began having terrible nightmares. I knew it was them, so I went back to the boundary line and shouted to them that I'm sorry and I wouldn't bother them again. That night, the nightmares ended, and so did my trips to the area. You might say I've grown up with aliens. I've seen them. Some look like us. Others, the old wise ones, are on average 7 feet tall with elongated skulls and blue translucent bodies. They are trillions of years older than we are and are very gentle and loving. I have had 2 of them appear before me from time to time to check in on me. They watched me grow up as an only child on a very isolated ranch, and I could always feel them protecting me when I was alone in the forest. They love us and consider us their children. They have come back now to help us through what is coming. They will soon introduce themselves to the world. That is why you are seeing so many ships. The blue beings don't need spacecraft. They are far more advanced. They travel by thought. They have showed me what is coming. A global nuclear war that will destroy nearly all of America, Europe, Russia, and China. There's an alien faction that is running the New World Order, but they're no match for the blue beings. They aren't here to stop it. They are here to pick up the broken pieces and help us start to rebuild once again. The new center of growth and knowledge will be in Venezuela. During the war, that entire country will be covered by a protective dome of energy. If you want a good timeline, watch very carefully what happens between Venezuela and the NWO. More and more, there's going to be aggression aimed at Venezuela by Bush and the NWO. Everyone will think it's for the oil. Not so. It's about the city. There's a massive underground city built by a confederation of aliens, hidden in the southern jungle of Venezuela, preparing to rebuild mankind. Tesla and Marconi were involved. I have met personally 2 high-ranking Venezuelan officers who interface with the city. The NWO knows full well about the city, but are powerless to do anything about it. My entire life has been about what I've just related, starting with my first deer trip into the Venezuelan jungles in 1989, exploring for gold and diamonds. That is where, when I first learned of the city, I was once again visited by the 2 blue beings who showed me what is coming. There is much more to the story. I've just hit the highlights. I can only state that what I was shown in 1989 appears to be falling in line with what is now taking place. The NWO is looking for something that would give them power and control over the blue beings. What they're looking for is hidden in the jungle. However, they will never find them, and that is why they are doomed and their time is running out.
This report comes out of Oxnard, California on December 25th, 1971 at around 8 a.m. I was walking with my mother, I was 12 years old, to church on Sunday morning. It was overcast when I suddenly remembered that the news said that a comet would be visible on Christmas Day, and that it could be the same one seen by the wise men. I looked up and I saw a ball of blue light come out of the clouds and back into the clouds. I saw the ball that was covered with blue flames, really beautiful, like an aquamarine gemstone. I could see the flames licking the surface of the object. I told my mom, but of course it was gone. I felt very fortunate to have seen the comet. It wasn't until a decade or more later that I thought, wait a minute, a comet isn't low enough to be in the clouds, and it was traveling slowly. It could have been my active imagination, maybe. If so, then the mind is an incredible thing. I saw it as clearly as any object is seen before me now. Did they imagine it or what? I don't know. I feel kind of ripped off on this one.
Continuing our joyous, festive, Yuletide, Christmas Flying Saucer show. This one's out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Another Christmas Eve sighting, 12/24/1972. At about 2 a.m., a disc-shaped UFO sighted outside Colorado Springs. I was driving from Denver to Colorado Springs. Before coming into Colorado Springs, in a rural area, I saw a star falling and said, "Money, money, money." And then suddenly, what I was watching was about 1,000 feet away. A disc-shaped ship hovered over some lights in the distance. Then the top half became transparent, and I could see people walking around and looking out the windows. This only was a few minutes, since my husband and I were driving down the road and did not stop. The roads were very icy, and there had to be 13 inches of a 13-inch snowstorm. That is all I remember. Okay, listen, In Dark Places listeners. If you're driving down the road and you see a craft that becomes transparent and you could see people walking around the windows. Stop the car and watch it. Take pictures. Thank you.
This report comes from Colorado/Oklahoma in flight on December 23rd, 1973, around 3 p.m. A metallic disc with rotating orange lights was seen from the window of a commercial aircraft between Dallas and Denver. I was flying home for Christmas from Florida via Dallas-Denver on a commercial aircraft, probably Braniff or American. We were at cruising altitude, 30,000 feet, between Dallas and Denver. I was gazing out the airplane window toward the west when a light from behind the plane caught my eye. I looked back and saw a saucer/disc flying parallel to the plane, a couple hundred yards from the plane and slightly lower. I watched while the disc caught up to the plane, passed it, and continued on ahead of the plane until I lost sight of it due to the angle of my line of sight out the plane window. The disc was fully visible and relatively close, so that I had an unimpeded view of the side and top of the disc. The disc itself was a silvery metallic color and was shaped very much like an upside-down saucer. Around the circumference of the disc, there were rotating bright orange lights and stationary orange lights looking very much like the wooden spokes of a vintage car when it travels at a certain speed, and it looks like the spokes are stationary. There were no markings or external features of any kind on the surface of the disc, and no signs of a vapor trail or obvious propulsion system. My feeling at the time was that the disc was about 40 feet across and 15 feet high. During the sighting, I glanced around the cabin of the plane to see if anyone else had seen it, but there were very few passengers aboard, and of those, no one seemed to be looking out my side of the plane. I would be thrilled if the captain and airline crew on this flight contacted you and made a report of their sighting, because they could not have helped seeing the disc. I'm sorry I didn't talk to them after the flight or remember the flight number, but at the time I was quite satisfied with the fact that I had seen this disc. I thought at the time that this could be some kind of experimental aircraft, but I have to this day not seen anything like it.
This one comes out of the Honduras from December 24th, 1974, at approximately 11:50 p.m., I could have reached out and touched the UFO. The saucer was about 2 feet in diameter. It flew about 3 feet in front of me. I was standing on a small balcony about 5 feet off the ground. The bottom part of the saucer was spinning. It had several lights all around it. It had orange, red, and silver lights. At the time, I thought it was a toy that I had never seen before. I remember running into my house and getting my dad to come out and see it because I wanted one. The saucer did not make any noise whatsoever. It just flew by and disappeared into the distance. The odd thing is that I knew who I was with. It was about 3 or 4 other kids, but I don't remember who they are, even though the incident is absolutely clear in my mind.
Our finest gifts we bring, pa-rum-pa-pum-pum, rum-pa-pum-pum, rum-pa-pum-pum. Peace on earth.
You see, it's kind of clever because it was the only David Bowie Christmas song I could find, and we're going to Bowie, Arizona for this next report. This was on December 23rd, 1975 at 2 a.m. This goes back a long way to December 1975. For obvious reasons, I never reported it. Traveling cross country from Houston, Texas to San Diego, California, I slept in El Paso, Texas, then headed west on Route 10. About 25 or 30 miles into Arizona, I stopped to stretch my legs in the desert. The weather was exceptionally clear, stars were almost on the horizon, and there was a full moon. One, maybe two cars passed in the roughly 15 minutes I was there. Looking south to southeast, I saw an array of lights just over my right shoulder, close to zenith, slightly to the west. I listened for a sound, but there was none. I first thought it might be a helicopter. Its overall shape was indeterminate, except for the elliptical oval array of lights, which were sharp and distinct. There were two colors of lights evenly spaced, alternating blush red and sort of mercury blue. For a minute or so, it was motionless, perfectly stable as I tried to make out an overall shape, determine what it was and its altitude. Not knowing its altitude or size, I couldn't estimate either. I guessed that the elliptical shape of the lights could be circular, depending on its aspect or tilt. It then moved purposely, but slightly to the north, then back just a little toward the south, and stopped. From a full stop, it then accelerated over the eastern horizon in what I estimated to be about 4 to 5 seconds. Its path was perfectly straight, without any random motion or bobbing. I stood and waited for about a minute, believing I'd hear a sonic boom, but there was no sound, sonic boom or otherwise. A diffuse blue contrail was left in its flight path, perfectly illuminated by the moon. This gradually turned to very thin white puffs and disappeared. No other aircraft were in the area. I thought about what I'd seen, thinking the eastern mountain ranges were maybe 5 to 8,000 feet in altitude. It seemed to clear them by about 5,000 feet, estimated, so I assumed the craft was maybe 12 to 15,000 feet in altitude. My confusion was how a craft or a missile could go from a full stop to 3 to 4 miles per second without any sound. I'm not exactly an untrained observer. For 10 years I worked on the development and launch of more than 20 rocket-borne and reconnaissance aircraft systems. After that I worked on Apollo instrumentation systems and was at the Flight Control Operations Directorate at the Johnson Space Center in Houston during Apollo 15, 16, and 17, and Skylab 1, 2, and 3. So maybe this guy wouldn't know if we actually went to the moon. For what it's worth to you, there you have it. It's been a long time, but I can visualize it as if it happened today. And that was in Bowie, Arizona. David Bowie.
This story comes from Winters Freeway, California. Also, December 24th, but 1975. About 9 p.m., I lost about 2 to 3 hours when I drove off. I felt sad, almost in tears, like I lost a dear friend. I was driving down Winters Freeway at 9 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve, 1975, going to Bernie, California to a Christmas party with my ex-wife. When I noticed off to my left in a field a large dark object floating up and down, shining 3 round lights all around the area. The light coming out was strange because they were flat, like a laser show, which weren't invented till years later. I flashed my headlights high and low several times, then suddenly it shot right over the top of my car and stayed there, shining those weird lights into my car, scaring the hell out of me. I went as fast as I could, but it stayed over my car. Suddenly, I felt happy, pulled over and got out and looked at this ship 4 feet above me. It was dark gray with small fins in back, arcing electricity when I was leaning on the car, watching it in the field again. Alright, he's not the best writer in the world, but he saw something.
This report comes from Tampa, Florida, December 25th, 1975, around 11 p.m. We saw a triangular, bright-looking star and watched it go straight, zigzag, zooming up and down. I asked him, is that a new aircraft on MacDill Air Force Base? He said, no. There's an exclamation mark. Plane or craft we have cannot move like that. No one was on the rooftop but us at the time, so he told me never to tell because people would think we were nuts. He had his career to think about. I will never forget it. I was about 15 or so, I believe. I'm now getting up in age, so I want it known and wonder if any other people living in Tampa saw this. We could not have been the only ones. It looked like a star. It was so bright and high in the sky. He said that this thing must be larger than what we were seeing. Another exclamation mark. Must be larger than what we were seeing. Just need someone to know this information in case anything ever happens to me.
Now, here are some of the UFO sightings made by our fellow New Yorkers during the past Christmas holidays. So someone's compiled this list specifically of Christmas UFO sightings in New York. On Christmas Day, 1999, at about 7:30 p.m., a Poughkeepsie resident had received a telescope for Christmas and was on the home's deck attempting to stargaze as the sky was partially overcast. Suddenly, in the northeastern sky, he saw a large chevron boomerang-shaped object moving slowly under the cloud layer. The object had a slight orange glow and was absolutely silent. The observer lost sight of it as it has passed beyond the tree line.
The story comes from New Brighton, Minnesota, on December 26, 1975. Seen bright light shining down on the neighborhood. A cross from Hanson Park. It's another one of these guys that are terrible writers that Jimmy mentioned earlier. From Hanson Park in New Brighton, Minnesota, at about 8 p.m. on December 26, 1975. Up and down the blocks southeast of the park, I got of get better look, and the bright light went for a second or so, and then came straight over the park south of us. We need a translator. No sound really, but then, in right to left, red, blue, and green lights came. I got in car, said let's get closer, and snap of fingers, left so fast in southeast of state.
Christmas Day 2000 at about 6:30 p.m. A Buffalo woman went outside to fill the bird feeders and witnessed a boomerang-shaped... Sorry, I'm laughing at a Buffalo woman. Alright. So this Buffalo woman witnessed a boomerang-shaped object traveling westward quite fast. Its shape defined only by its slight glowing white luminescence. She lost sight of it when it just disappeared.
We've got a little community in West Virginia, a little north of Chapmanville, called Big Ugly. And my buddy Roger went there and saw a concert one time. It was fun. I remember my Aunt Dixie reading a newspaper story back in the 90s, and the headline said, "Big Ugly Woman Dies." That would never make the press these days. Someone would get all butthurt about that for sure. It should be small, challenged, average-looking adult female human being dies. You know, those guys. Take that statue down. It hurt my feelings. Big ugly woman. Big ugly West Virginia. Yep. Okay, UFO stories. This one comes from Hiawassee, Georgia, on December 24th, 1976, around 9 p.m. The large red glowing craft was silently moving across the sky, about 100 yards above the ground. The craft moved behind a small mountain and disappeared. For years after the encounter, I would have incidents until around the age of 16. And then I got to see something being in my room. Great report.
Christmas Eve 2006 at about 7:30 p.m. near Arcadia. A motorist and passenger saw a craft gliding across the top of the hill from one cornfield into another. It was dark gray with no lights and massive. They report that they could not see the beginning or end of it. It moved more smoothly than anything any of them had ever seen. Then it disappeared.
This story comes from Winslow, Maine, on December 25th, 1976, around 7 p.m. My mother and father were looking out the picture window in the living room toward the southwest when they notices two objects moving from that direction toward them northeast. They called me from the other end of the house. They did not know what they were seeing. I grabbed my binoculars and ran to where they were. I located the objects. They were like two pie plates placed open side to open side. We saw them edge on. Each one had a distinct pale yellow light on their bottom side or face. The full moon was shining in the sky with scattered clouds. It was reflecting off the objects. Also, the light on the bottom side was reflecting off that surface. They appeared to be made of a very polished or shiny metal. I tracked them through the picture window until they went overhead. I then ran to the other end of the house and reacquired them. One of them, the one originally on the left and now on the right, continued on its original course. The one originally on the right but now on the left, due to my change of position and viewing perspective, had curved off and was heading straight north. There was no apparent sound, and they moved at a steady pace. The lights were steady. They were probably 200 to 300 feet up. There was more perspective on their height as they were moving over some trees and observed through some. I would guess they were probably 30 feet in diameter and a third of that thick.
Christmas Day 2007 at about 2 p.m. A Copeg resident went outside for a smoke. He looked up and saw a spherical white object leisurely cruising along in the northeastern sky, moving west. He watched it for perhaps 20 seconds, then glanced away to get his phone to record it. When he looked back, it was gone. A veteran observer, he comments, "There are really, truly some strange skies in Long Island."
Oh, little town of Bethlehem.
This story comes from Lancaster, Kentucky, on December 23rd, 1977, at 9 a.m. Well, I didn't know there was a place you can put sightings. Yes, I was 7, and it was right around Christmas time. We lived in some apartments in Lancaster, Kentucky. We was going to walk back to our apartment building from a neighbor visit. It was myself, one sister, my dad, my mom, and 2 other kids from the neighborhood also witnessed it. Anyways, we were getting ready to cross the street when you couldn't help but to look up! Exclamation mark. There was a huge white hovering ship, round saucer-shaped hovering, above the apartment building across the street! Exclamation mark. It was dead silent, no sound. It was white in color, and you could clearly see this no problem. You didn't just see lights! Exclamation mark. You seen the whole ship! Exclamation mark. It looked like a row or more of lights, kind of like bulbs, going all the way around the object, and the color of the ship was a whitish color, and there was some kind of antenna coming off the top. We all just stood there and stared. It was like we couldn't move or we were in shock. Well, it hovered quietly, maybe 3 minutes, maybe less, and then slowly turned sideways, like on its side. And then it was like whoosh and disappeared like a flash of light! Exclamation mark. It was so amazing and neat and scary all in one. It's an experience I will never forget. I guarantee you that! A lot of exclamation marks. My dad never called the police or whomever you'd call back then, fearing they'd just laugh at him. But I, for one, know flying saucers, my friend, are not fiction.
Sleigh bells ring, are you listening?
Christmas Eve 2007 at about 2 p.m. at Astoria, Queens, resident made a 12-second sighting from the East River shore. The sighting involved a very big, dull, wingless object moving westward 20 times faster than any other craft in the sky.
Here to stay is a new bird.
This report comes from Jackson, Mississippi on December 24th, 1977 at around midnight. Summary: it was Christmas Eve. We decided to take a different route when we went through the town of Pocahontas. We stopped at the stop sign when this object about 4 feet in diameter came down about 2 feet in front of our windshield. We were amazed, so the only thing left to do is ease the car up, and when we did, the object fled straight up as if it was as terrified as we were and disappeared. The object flat, round, and orange, no multiple colors, and 4 feet in diameter. The object was flat, round, orange color, no other lights. It was as if it was observing us, but there was no harm done. The location is near an Indian burial ground. There was only one. None of us have ever experienced this before then, and since have never seen it again. But I do keep an open mind.
Time to fool around, later on.
Christmas Day 2008 at about midnight. A New York City resident on his building's roof observed a super bright object in the southwest sky. It was observed as stationary in the sky and wasn't moving across the sky like the stars. Members of his household observed the bright stationary object for about an hour when it disappeared.
In a wonderland.
The story comes from Valdosta, Georgia on December 23rd, 1978 at around 9:30 p.m. Warm December night, 2 days before Christmas. While standing in my landlord's backyard watching the goings-on in the chicken coop with my landlord's son, just above treetop and chevron-shaped aircraft with no fuselage. No, it wasn't a stealth. Passed ever so slowly above us. I could make out 2 rows of lights on the bottom of the wings, 8 lights on each row. White light almost recessed into the wings. The object made very little noise. It was not engine noise, neither was there any vapor trail. Across the road on Route 7 was the north end of Moody Air Force Base and F4D phantom jets were making their approach to the flight line. This object headed directly toward those landing F-4s. I was half expecting some collision, but the chevron object flew directly above the F-4s, and amazingly, the F-4s never aborted or broke from their landing approach. The above craft was about 40 feet long. My background at that time, I was 22 years old, sober, and a senior airman enlisted in the Air Force at Moody Air Force Base, located at Valdosta, Georgia. Today, I am a senior debug technician up in Massachusetts. Won't mention the company name. The object was chevron-shaped, not pointed on the ends, but rounded.
So jump in bed and cover your head, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight.
These aren't too exciting so far. Christmas Eve 2009 at about midnight, a motorist and passenger in Fairview saw two odd lights. Upon closer observation, it was clear to them it wasn't an airplane or helicopter. They had pulled over and saw other people looking at the two UFOs flying together. The sighting gave the two of them the creeps, so they promptly left the area. Of course, just leave. You see a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, just leave and go get your frickin' gingerbread and tea.
Everything right. So fill your hearts with Christmas cheer, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight.
The story comes from Indianapolis, Indiana, December 25th, 1978, around 9:30 p.m. As I was driving west on 30th Street, Indianapolis West Side, I turned off the major two-lane thoroughfare onto a winding residential street. I glanced up and saw red blinking lights, lighting in succession, with the two circular disc-shaped craft being defined by the red lights. I stopped the car and pulled to the curb to try to make sense of the phenomenon, when both crafts, hovering together at about 500 to 800 feet, suddenly went vertical, maybe somewhat angled away, and quickly disappeared into the night sky. I heard no sounds.
Hang your stockings and say your prayers, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight.
Christmas Eve 2011 at about 7:30 p.m., a motorist and passengers in the Brewerton area witnessed in a clear sky a yellow-orange fireball object flying east to west, low in the sky. They report that the object appeared to have helicopters following it. The object appeared to stop, and as they watched the fireball object, they noted suddenly it shot to the sky at a great speed and disappeared.
Run, run, Rudolph. Randolph ain't too far behind.
This story comes from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, December 25th, 1978. While camping approximately 6 miles east of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, on December 25th, 1978, I witnessed a phenomenon. At 9:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, looking north, I saw a very large glow, perhaps 2,000 feet above the mountains. These mountains were less than 2 miles away, and my very first instinctive thought was that a 747 had exploded. In a few seconds I realized I was viewing something very extraordinary and tried to absorb details while yelling to other campers to wake up and see what I was watching. A friend's sister and mother emerged and immediately pushed the children back into the Volkswagen bus they were camping in. One of them exclaimed it was a flying saucer, a thought I hadn't permitted myself to have. The large orange glow must have been between 100 and 300 feet in length. Within the elliptical glow were two smaller eclipses, perhaps 1/3 of the way in from each side, which were brighter glows within the large orange glow and close to the color of a white fluorescent light. One of the two women with me said there were two saucers, but I felt and still feel there was only one huge structure, because the two brighter glows within the large glow stayed perfectly parallel to each other as the large glow descended to my left at about a 35-degree angle. I viewed this descent for about 45 seconds to a minute and a half. The glow disappeared behind a huge rock called Cabo Falso, about 3/4 of a mile away. As the glow came closer to the top of Cabo Falso, the brightness began to fade, almost as if it were burning out. There were no sparks, but the extremely bright glow grew much dimmer. The next day I went to Cabo to find out if anyone else saw this light. I talked with 5 or 6 others who had seen it from an outdoor beach bar, and they said the glow went into the ocean. Like myself, they were teachers enjoying a Christmas vacation. The next year I spoke with a lady named Elsa, who was married to Harvey, a couple we camped with for about 10 years. She told me that Harvey would not permit her to talk about it, but she had seen a large saucer hovering over the brush not too far from where she was camped. The saucer then flew above the mountains where I first saw it. The next morning, Elsa told me she examined the nearby brush, and it had been burned a brown color by the saucer. Elsa and Harvey have both passed away. They were in their 70s in 1978. I recall trying to listen if I could hear this glow, but the only identifiable sound was hundreds of coyotes howling from a mile or more away and beneath the glow. There was nothing surreal about the experience. It seemed natural. I thought at the time that all you had to do to see things like this is to spend a lot of time outdoors at night. I have seen strange lights on occasions since, but these have always been 20 or 30 miles away and not identifiable. The experience was the most memorable of my life.
Now we got a bunch of sightings on a Christmas Day 2011. First one was at 7:30 p.m. 3 Holbrook residents were riding in a car on the Long Island Expressway when they spotted 4 golden lights sitting in perfect alignment across the sky. They report that the lights were very bright. They pulled off to an exit, but the object was gone. Same day, at around 7:45 p.m., a Northport resident observed a bright red object moving silently and slowly across the sky. The object was reportedly to have occasionally stopped in its motion just before disappearing. Same night, 9:30 p.m., a Long Island resident witnessed a rapidly moving formation of 6 orange fireball objects ascending. Then each of the fireballs winked out one by one. The observers say there were no blinking lights or strobes. Christmas Eve again, same night, same time. A New York City family went outside and noted a number of their neighbors outside as well, looking at the sky. Hi! What do you want, some food? That's Skydog's first appearance on In Dark Places. So these neighbors were looking into the sky. There were bright orange fireball objects flying in the sky above them. The objects flew around a little bit, then hovered, then flew around some more. Finally, the fireball stopped, hovered, and disappeared. While they were all talking about what just happened, another orange fireball UFO showed up, but put on a little show and then disappeared. This is all from 2011 at different times. This one's at 11 p.m. A Wantagh resident heard a visiting friend exclaim, "What the hell is that light?" The pair ran outside, and directly above them were 2 huge, bright orange vertical cylinders moving eastward. After a few minutes, the objects changed their orientation slightly and winked out. They report that the whole household was frightened afterwards. Around midnight, a resident of Bleecker reported that a bright red object moved rapidly across the local sky. It did some stop and hover maneuvers, then proceeded in its travel. The observer states that there was a local police response and military presence shortly after the sighting.
I think Skydog is just about ready for some Christmas dinner. This one is from Naples, Italy, on December 26, 1978. I was about 8.5 years old. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I awake around 2 a.m. I feel like going to open the Persagna, an Italian blind, of our 8th floor balcony window. Never done that before, being just 8. So I step outside on the balcony, and then I notice on my left, behind a building, something moving gently. A weird object. Because I used to look at the pics of a mystery book my mom had, I knew what I was looking at. A spaceship floating in the distance, but close enough to see its light structures. With curiosity, I kept observing and noticed the object is getting closer to me. In fact, the whole structure of it is visible. So, naive as I am, I wave a hand to say hi, because it was big and getting closer and lower to our building. I start to feel less comfortable and a little worried, so I decided not to be alone. I go in to wake up my little brother, whom slept in my same room. And then we go back outside, and the object keeps getting closer to us. And from curiosity, I realize maybe it's a good idea to wake up my mom. I run to wake up my parents, but feeling guilty for leaving alone my 7-year-old brother when I tell my mom, "Mom, there's a UFO." At first, she looks at me funny, and then she decides to follow me to see what's going on. While my dad did not care, no matter how much I insisted. We ran back outside after turning on the lights in the house. With Mom, maybe also for turning the lights on, the UFO keeps coming closer a little more. And then it slows down its pace until it stops and just floats in the air as if it wants to be admired. It is about 300 yards straight in front of us, but slightly higher. We can see its lights, like windows or engines. After a while, and to me it seemed a very long time, it gradually, but really slowly, as if it does not want to intimidate us, moves away from us, while we keep admiring toward the right side. It does that until it's not visible anymore, for it disappears in the distance behind our building. When it was gone, we went back inside, and before going back to bed, I looked at the clock, 2 a.m., wishing never to forget this event, so I believe it was around that time it occurred. The next morning, my parents, fearing unknown consequences, not knowing whom to contact either, decided not to mention what happened. But after such a long time with my mom, we decided at least to mention this to you, so you'll have a record of the occurrence. But in our opinion, telepathic ability on their part was possible.
And these two are from 2012. At about 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, an Amherst resident was leaving a Christmas party and witnessed some strange lights. He called back to the rest of the party, and together they all observed 3 silent orange lights, initially traveling horizontally at about 500 feet. Then the objects rose vertically till they disappeared. Christmas Day, 2012, 8:45 p.m. A motorist and passengers from Pine Bush were driving on State Route 302 and witnessed a Y-shaped formation of bright red lights. They observed that multiple cars pulled over watching this formation of up to 20 lights. After a few minutes, the lights vanished. The observers state that they were all pretty scared.
This story comes from Cairns, Australia. QLD. I don't know what that means. December 23rd, 1980. I remember it was close to Christmas, and I had prayed to God for months and months every night to please do something about my abusive father, as he had threatened to kill my mother. And if it wasn't for my quick thinking, she would be dead. Anyway, I was 8 years old and angry at God for giving me such a father. I went to bed praying and wishing for a better father and a Barbie bus and Barbies for Christmas. I was awoken by a very dull humming noise. although when I woke, I could not hear it at all. I sat bolt upright, and there, right outside my window, was a disc-shaped object hovering very low. The middle bit where all the windows were seemed to revolve around, and I could see people walking around inside. My first reaction was one of immediate fear, and then an overwhelming sense of love and security surrounded me. And moments later, I found myself at the back door trying to find the key to get out and get into the backyard to go with them. I actually had the key in the door and the door open when a voice inside my head told me to stop for the sake of my mother. You see, she slept in my room, as my father used to abuse her if she slept in the same bed with him, and I was worried if I was gone in the morning, she would get the blame and the beating for it. I closed the door and locked it and raced back to my room to find the craft still in the same position. And when I looked out the window at it, I could hear them communicating with me in their mind, saying, "Don't be frightened, we won't hurt you, come with us." To this, I told them I was afraid for my mother, and I said I wanted to get married and have children first. And they said they would come back for me one day. The disc-shaped object lifted slightly and noiselessly before moving toward the mountains, where it seemed to move rapidly and dart sideways. I tried to wake my mom to tell her, but I couldn't wake her, which is unusual as she is a super light sleeper. I told my sister 15 years later, and a few people, but no one really believed me except my sister and my husband. There were red lights on the underside of the craft, and the craft itself was metallic white in color.
And lastly, Christmas Day 2012 at about 11 p.m., a Port Jervis couple and their daughters witnessed a pair of bright orange-red objects flying west to east. They watched the object for about 15 minutes before the objects vanished. Now, I don't know if you guys are thinking the same thing I'm thinking, but a lot of these people on Christmas Eve saw this red-orange light going around the sky, hovering around, disappearing. I'm thinking it was Santa's sleigh. I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but it's very possible. Anyways, have a nice special festive Christmas UFO day. Thank you.
And that's about all the show for this special Christmas edition. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.